I told him, man up, in front of our friends. I didn't expect him to leave me over it. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything fell apart. It was during what should have been a casual dinner party at our home, something we'd hosted dozens of times before. Mark had been quieter than usual that evening, picking at his food and barely participating in the conversation. I knew why. He'd lost a major account at work that morning, one he'd spent months cultivating. But instead of being understanding, I did something unforgivable. "What's wrong with you tonight?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. The chatter around our dining table died down. "You're being such a downer. Just man up and get over it." The words hung in the air like poison. Mark's face, usually so expressive, went completely blank. Our friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. In that moment, I didn't realize I'd just shattered something irreparable in our 3-year relationship. I'd always prided myself on being direct, on saying what others might only think. It was part of my charm, or so I believed. Growing up with 3 brothers had taught me to be tough, to push through emotions, rather than wallow in them. When Mark and I first started dating, I'd found his sensitivity refreshing. He wasn't afraid to cry during movies or talk about his feelings. But somewhere along the line, I'd started seeing those qualities as weaknesses. That evening, Mark excused himself shortly after my comment, claiming a headache. Our friends left early, making awkward excuses about early meetings the next day. I cleaned up alone, telling myself he was being oversensitive. After all, it was just a job, just an account. There would be others. When I finally went upstairs to our bedroom, Mark was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, with a small duffel bag at his feet. My stomach dropped. "I'm going to stay at Jason's for a few days," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "I need some space to think." "You're seriously leaving because of one comment?" I scoffed, even as panic began to rise in my chest. "Don't you think you're overreacting a little?" He stood up slowly, shouldering his bag. "It's not just one comment, Sarah. It's a pattern. You've been slowly chipping away at my self-worth for months now, and I've been making excuses for you. Tonight just made me realize I can't do this anymore." "What are you talking about? I'm just trying to help you toughen up a little. The world isn't kind to sensitive men." He finally looked at me then, and the hurt in his eyes made me take a step back. The world might not be kind to sensitive men, but I expected my partner to be. You know what happened at work today? I lost that account because I refused to lie to the client about our capabilities. I chose integrity over profit, and instead of supporting me, you humiliated me in front of our friends. "That's not what I started, but he cut me off with a gentle headshake. "You know what makes someone a real man, Sarah? It's not about suppressing emotions or manning up. It's about having the courage to be authentic, to stand up for what's right, and to be vulnerable when necessary. I've spent the last year trying to become someone I'm not to please you, and I'm done." As he walked past me toward the door, I felt my defenses crumbling. "Mark, wait. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, let's talk about this." "We've been talking for months," he replied. "Or rather, I've been trying to talk, and you've been dismissing my feelings as weakness. Remember last month when I told you how much it hurt when you laughed at me for getting emotional at my grandmother's funeral?" I winced at the memory. I had told him he was making a scene, that men shouldn't cry in public. At the time, I thought I was helping him save face. "Or 2 weeks ago," he continued, "when you told your brothers I was basically one of the girls because I enjoy cooking and prefer reading to watching sports. You thought it was funny." I felt degraded. Each example hit me like a physical blow. Moments I had dismissed as harmless teasing suddenly took on a darker significance when viewed through his eyes. "The worst part is, you don't even see what you're doing," Mark said softly. "You've internalized these toxic ideas about masculinity so deeply that you're trying to force them on me. But I like who I am, Sarah. I'm proud of being empathetic. I'm proud that I can express my emotions freely. And I deserve someone who appreciates those qualities instead of trying to change them." He was right, of course. In my misguided attempts to make him stronger, I had been slowly destroying the very things that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. His gentleness with children and animals, his willingness to listen without trying to fix everything. The way he could sit with me through my own emotional storms without judgment. "I need you to understand something," he said, pausing at the bedroom doorway. "When you tell me to man up, what you're really saying is that my natural way of being isn't good enough, that I need to conform to some arbitrary standard of masculinity to be worthy of respect. Do you know how damaging that is?" I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. Every interaction from the past year was replaying in my mind with brutal clarity. The time I'd mocked him for getting teary-eyed during our friend's wedding vows. The way I'd rolled my eyes when he wanted to discuss his feelings about our relationship. The constant little jabs about him being too sensitive or not man enough. "I never meant," I began. "I know you didn't mean to be cruel," he interrupted. "But intent doesn't erase impact. Every time you belittle my emotions or mock my sensitivity, you're telling me that your love is conditional on me becoming someone else. That's not love, Sarah. That's control." He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Even now, he wasn't afraid to show his vulnerability, and I felt a sudden, sharp ache of regret. "The thing is," he continued, "I've spent a lot of time thinking about why you do this, about why you're so uncomfortable with emotional expression in men, and I think it says more about you than it does about me." That stung because it was true. Growing up, I'd watched my father ridicule my brothers for showing any sign of weakness. "Real men don't cry," he'd say. "Real men tough it out." I'd internalized those messages, believing them to be truths rather than the damaging stereotypes they were. The days following Mark's departure were a blur of unanswered texts and ignored calls. I fluctuated between anger, "He's being ridiculous," denial, "He'll come back when he calms down," and crushing guilt. Our friends, when they finally started responding to my messages, were surprisingly frank. "You've been really hard on him lately," my best friend Lisa told me over coffee. "We've all noticed it, but we didn't know how to bring it up. The way you speak to him sometimes, it's not okay, Sarah." "I was just joking around," I protested weakly. "Were you?" Lisa asked, stirring her latte. Because from where we were sitting, it looked a lot like emotional abuse. That word, abuse, hit me like a slap in the face. I'd always thought of myself as a strong, independent woman who didn't take any nonsense. The idea that I might be the toxic one in the relationship had never crossed my mind. "Think about it," Lisa continued, her voice gentle but firm. "If Mark had been constantly belittling you for being too feminine or too emotional, would you have put up with it? If he had mocked you in front of your friends for crying at a funeral, would you have stayed?" I sat there, coffee growing cold, as the full weight of my behavior settled over me. I'd been so focused on molding Mark into my idea of what a man should be that I'd completely lost sight of who he actually was, a kind, empathetic person who had loved me exactly as I was. A week turned into 2, then 3. Mark's silence was deafening. His few responses to my messages were polite but distant, making it clear that he needed space to process everything. I threw myself into therapy, finally ready to confront my own issues with masculinity and emotional expression. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, helped me understand how my father's toxic masculinity had shaped my views. "You've been perpetuating the same cycle of emotional suppression that hurt you as a child," she explained. "By trying to make Mark tougher, you're actually recreating the emotional environment that caused you so much pain growing up." It was during one of these sessions that I received the email from Mark. He had found an apartment and would be coming by the house the following weekend to collect his things. The finality of it made my hands shake as I read his carefully worded message. When he arrived that Saturday, he brought his brother and 2 friends to help. I had packed most of his belongings already, trying to make the process easier. The man who walked into my house was different from the one who had left 3 weeks ago. He stood taller, seemed more confident. Freedom from constant criticism had already begun to heal him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said as his friends carried boxes to the waiting truck. "And I want you to know that I forgive you." Those words, delivered with such genuine compassion, broke something inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I realized what I had thrown away. "I'd been seeing a therapist," I told him, wiping my eyes. I'm working on my issues. I understand now how wrong I was, how much I hurt you. He nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. I'm glad you're getting help, Sarah. You deserve to heal from whatever made you believe that emotions are weakness. But I need you to understand that we can't go back. Some things once broken can't be fixed. I could change, I whispered. I could be better. I believe you will be better, he said gently. But not for me. You need to do this for yourself. And honestly, I need to be with someone who never saw my sensitivity as something that needed to be fixed in the first place. As his friends carried out the last of his boxes, Mark paused in the doorway. You know what's ironic? He said. All those times you told me to man up, I was actually being the strongest version of myself. It takes real courage to be vulnerable, to stay true to yourself, when the world, and the person you love, is telling you to be something else. He left his key on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker we had bought together on our first Christmas as a couple. The sound of the front door closing felt like the period at the end of a sentence, final and unchangeable. In the months that followed, I heard through mutual friends that Mark was thriving. He'd started his own consulting firm, one that emphasized ethical business practices. He was dating someone new, a woman who appreciated his emotional intelligence and celebrated his sensitivity rather than trying to suppress it. As for me, I'm still in therapy, still unpacking the layers of internalized misogyny and toxic masculinity that led me to hurt someone I loved. I've learned that real strength isn't about suppressing emotions or conforming to gender stereotypes. It's about having the courage to be authentic, to admit when you're wrong, and to take responsibility for your actions. Sometimes I drive past our old favorite spots. The cafe where we had our first date, the park where we used to walk on Sunday mornings, and I'm hit with waves of regret so intense, they take my breath away. Not just for losing Mark, but for all the times I made him feel less than worthy because he didn't fit into my narrow definition of masculinity. The phrase man up doesn't cross my lips anymore. I've seen firsthand the damage it can do, how it perpetuates harmful stereotypes and destroys the beautiful complexity of human emotion. When I hear others use it now, I speak up, sharing what I've learned about the cost of such casual cruelty. Mark was right. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Our relationship was one of them. But through its ending, I learned invaluable lessons about love, acceptance, and the true meaning of strength. I hope that someday, I'll be worthy of a partner who shows the same kind of emotional courage that Mark did. And this time, I'll know better than to try to change them. Because in the end, telling someone to man up says nothing about their character and everything about yours. It took losing someone I love to understand that real strength lies not in suppressing emotions, but in having the courage to feel them fully and express them honestly. I see Mark occasionally at mutual friends gatherings or around town. He's happy now, genuinely happy, in a way he never was with me. And while part of me will always regret what I lost, a bigger part is grateful that he had the strength to walk away. Sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is leave you to face your own demons, even if it breaks both your hearts in the process. So this is my confession. My cautionary tale. To anyone who's ever been tempted to tell someone to man up or to suppress their emotions to fit some arbitrary standard of masculinity, don't. The price of such casual cruelty is far too high, and by the time you realize your mistake, it might be too late to fix it. I learned this lesson the hard way. I just hope others can learn from my story without having to lose someone they love in the process.